Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me for another conversation with Colleen Jack. For those of you who've missed our earlier episodes, Colleen is a master pattern maker, and today she's going to share some information with you about cutting orders. So if you are an aspiring fashion designer or clothing manufacturer, please, I think you should watch this video. It's really going to help you to plan your collections and make sure that you create a sustainable range. Colleen?
Perfect. So we have been exploring how to cost garments, and an essential aspect of that is using a cutting order in order to create the rigor that goes into manufacturing a garment and costing a garment. And so while we use a cutting order, it tracks a couple of things. It's engineered to protect you and hold the cut, make and trim factory to account. It's also accompanied by a delivery note detailing all the items that go with that production order. And so are you supplying the fusing? Are you supplying the thread, the labels, the size labels? All of those things that need to go with the garment, the zips, the haberdashery, the trim. And the cutting order will also have swatches of the fabric that you have delivered. And so often, what happens is that the fabric is stored underneath the cutting tables, because obviously it takes quite a lot of space and you can't have people tripping over rolls of fabric. And so if you are not sticking a little swatch onto the cutting order, the person will simply pull out the first roll of fabric that's underneath the table in the right color. And so, you know, somebody may have delivered their black fabric and you've delivered your black fabric, and without a swatch, how does the person who's going to lay up the cutting know which is the right black fabric? And remember that it's dark under the tables. Often it's dark in storerooms. And so it is vitally important that a cutting order sits as the communication tool for you while you are not in the factory. The other thing is please make sure that on your delivery notes and on your cutting order, there is a place for the person in charge to sign. And the minute they have signed that cutting order, it becomes a legally binding document. You may also want to put on the back of your cutting order your terms and conditions. But normally a cutting order will have a signature, a delivery date that you delivered the work material for, and a delivery date of when you want to collect your finished garments. And by having somebody who is in the power, not just somebody who opened the door and let your delivery person in, but having somebody deliver it and sign it who is in a place where they can actually say, yes, I accept and acknowledge the receipt of these goods. The cutting order is explicit in detailing what to expect and will give clear indications of what has been ordered, what needs to be cut, what must be delivered, and also if there were any recuts made on the garments. So say a machinist was disturbed and she cut a hole in the garment and they unpicked the front panel, recut the front panel and finished the garment. And also if any of the garments were rejected. So you know what has happened to your roll of fabric and how that fabric was actually used to take up that whole roll.
The more I listen to you, the more I realize that this is the document that was missing when I was manufacturing clothing in the 1990s. I cannot tell you how many challenges I had with CMT companies that this document would have solved and would have covered me for, because I lost thousands of rands to errors made in the CMT factory that I now realize, listening to you, were partly my responsibility because they didn't have enough information, and partly their responsibility because they never took ownership of some of what happened.
Yeah, so you might be told, oh, there were rejects or there was a slub in the fabric and so we had to make a recut. I want that back. And so originally, when we started this process, I said to you, there is no waste. Fabric is so ecologically expensive to produce. It uses so much water. So gone are the days of throwing away offcuts. Those offcuts are incredibly valuable. And so if there is a reject garment, I would like that reject garment back. Because it's my property, because it's my intellectual property, but also it's for me to decide that I could then collect all of those reject garments and give it into a place where children have no clothes anyway, or people have no clothes. And a small hole, I might not want somebody to pay for it, but I have no problem donating that garment to somebody who could wear it. If there are rejects, I want to see the rejects, and then I can make a decision. Do we then cut those down into smaller pieces so that we can patchwork them to create a new fabric? What are we going to do with those rejects? And then I also, very importantly, deliver with that cutting order a rating on the cutting order, and I'll show you just now what that looks like. And so I want the cutting room to match my rating of how many square meters I've used to get that garment out, or improve it. And even if it's 1 centimeter, over 100 garments, it makes up something. What would I do with that little something? Over 1,000 garments, I could get another garment out. And so that matching that rating or better that rating is absolutely fantastic information.
So what would you suggest somebody does if the factory doesn't match the rating?
That I want a phone call. I want a WhatsApp. I want to know I'm 10 centimeters over, and what is the reason for that?
Okay.
And there can be various reasons. It could be that I have, and we said this in our costing schedule last time we spoke, is in order to recover my research and development costs, I have to cut a minimum amount of garments. And in order to break even, I have to cut a minimum of garments. And so normally it's over 4 size ways, broken into a size curve that goes 1, 2, 2, 1, depending on what your size range is, and over 4 colorways. And normally it is your 3 standard colors that you would be selling, your black, white, navy, and say stone. And then your 5th colorway would be your fashion item for that season. And so on the fashion colorway, they may not meet that rating because, say, they've got a blocker pattern, or that fabric comes on a slightly narrower width, some reason like that. But that is information that the cutting room would give immediately to me as the client.
Okay, so you want that information in real time as it happens, not when you collect the order at the end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if they are bettering the rating, I also want to call, because a classic would be that instead of going across the width, there's waist on the side and they've turned the waistband upside down and gone across the selvage instead of across the width. And while that might save space, there might be consequences to cutting the waistband the wrong way around. And so suddenly the pants don't fit properly because there's more stretch on the selvage than there is on the width of the fabric. You know, various different reasons, or there's less stretch, whatever. And so I'm also nervous about them improving the rating, say by 10 centimeters. 1 centimeter improved, fantastic. That's wonderful. And if you are using a digital marker, you will have that marker very, very accurately done by the computer. And so it's also important that whatever is cut and all of the offcuts are saved in order for me to make decisions around that. As I say, nothing is wasted. And what little byproducts could we do? So let's say there is this 10 centimeter spare where I could have done a waistband, and instead I could make scrunchies. And it really doesn't matter which way the scrunchies are cut. And so when they have finished manufacturing in the process and they are approaching my delivery date that I've asked for. When I go and collect, I want the cutting order, the delivery note, and the cutting marker, if there was a marker. I want that back. And why I'm saying, why would you bother to collect a marker? That marker, although it has no pattern instructions on it, it's just white butcher paper. That marker is essentially your pattern. Mm. And so I don't want my R&D costs and my intellectual capital floating around as a potential for somebody else to use that cut paper. So I want all of that back. And as I said, it's a legally binding document. So this is basically what a cutting order looks like. You've got your pattern number, you've got your order number, you've got your order date, your delivery date. We've got the signature of the person who received that. And then I've got your style. You've also got your technical drawing. And sometimes I want a front and back of that. And then you have got your breakdown of everything that you have delivered with your delivery note. And so, is it the fabric, the lining, the fusing, the wadding, the contrast fabric, sew-on labels, wash care labels, size labels? Those labels are sometimes, the wash labels and the size labels are supplied by the CMT. And so then I would interrogate that CMT cost. Are they charging me for sew-in labels, wash care labels, and thread? Often a CMT will supply the thread. And so I want to know that that is part of the CMT cost that I have inculcated, and I don't have to absorb that in my costing schedule. I want to know if there's buttons, studs, zips, elastic, hanger tape, packaging. How is the CMT going to deliver your finished work? Is it hanging on a rail? Is it packed into a box? Do I want them to use plastic packaging? What kind of micron are they using? How thick is that plastic bag? Is that part of our branding and aligned to our branding? Is there embroidery? And remember, when we send stuff out for embroidery, there are often issues with bundles getting mixed. And so you might have color variances. And of course, that they would lose a panel. And then you've got to make a recut, send it back out to the embroidery or the printing or back. As I said to you, it will have the fabric swatches that you have provided. Here are your normal, I've given 5 spaces here for your 4 colorways plus your fashion color. And then it's broken down into, am I using small, medium, large, extra large, or am I using inches, 36, 38, 40, 42, 44. I want to see the total units ordered, the total units cut, and the total units rejected. And so I can match up my size totals when I come to the end of it. I always put on any form that I send through to a CMT, general comments. I open the space of communication that I may have gone through all of the production to get this pattern ready for production. And a machinist on the line will then still pick up mistakes that need to be improved on. And so we want machinists to be able to communicate with us, cutters to be able to communicate with us, QC departments, quality control departments to speak back to us. And so I have given always a space. Tell me what you would like us to improve on and change.
Okay.
So let's talk about, yes.
What challenges, what things typically go wrong in the CMT factory? What are the most common?
That the sample hand is really good at sewing things together, and she may make things fit, but in a line, your sewing nips on a pattern are the way that you communicate again eloquently without you being in the factory. And so good machinists will check that their nips match exactly when they're sewing seams together. And so a good line will pick up whether your notches are good or not. And they can then phone or write a message saying, nips are not great. Another thing that can happen is we've sampled often in black because you can always sell them. And black fabric, you know this because of the dyeing process, is always slightly different handle than other colors. And so a sample will go together nicely on the black because maybe it's a bit stiffer. especially on viscose knits. But when we get to the lighter colors, it's like chewing gum and it stretches out. And suddenly our sample looks different, our production looks different than our sample, because we sampled in black and now we've got the garment hanging in white, and it's just totally dropped out and the seams are not looking good. Yeah, nothing else comes to mind, but stuff happens. Stuff happens that sampling is ideal and production will throw up anything that we haven't checked on in. And so sometimes we do run a production run before we run the full amount of what's ordered, just so that we can iron out those last few things.
Okay, that's very useful information. Thank you.
So Mel, the next thing is deciding what to call your garment in terms of a size. And we get the feedback that different manufacturers, different boutiques, different retail environments have different sizes. And why can't we get sizing unified? And that really depends on who your target market is. And so in a classic fitting model, you will have your 87 centimeter bust, your 68 centimeter or 66 centimeter waist, and your 98 centimeter hip. Those are ideal. We do not live in an ideal world. And so boutiques, manufacturers will target their market knowing that they have, say, a more mature woman. And so her waist is never going to be 66 centimeters. And so we're working more between a 68 to a 71 centimeter waist. Let's say that we're working with classically South African figures. We are looking at more of a curvy figure and more of a hip shape. And so you will be sitting nowhere close to a 98 centimeter hip. You can go up to anything to 103 centimeters. And so when I give these in-between measurements, it's to give an idea of somewhere in that range. And the difference between one size to the next size is only 5 centimeters. So here is a very good opportunity, firstly, to decide, are you going to use empirical measurements like 34 centimeters, 34? 34 comes from the half waist measurement. And so that's where a 34 originates from. It's the half waist measurement is 34 inches. And so 10, it doesn't matter what it means. It just, for me, is a suggestion that we move into, especially if we're going to be selling online, calling it a medium. Because most fabrics that we're working on have some stretch in it. Even the wovens have now got a little bit of elastin into it. Anything between 8 to 14 centimeters, anything between 8 to 14% stretch in that woven. And so I recommend that you don't stick to an empirical measurement like 34, 36, 38, but actually go into small, medium, large, extra large. And then if you are working in stretch, know that that 8 to 14% stretch will give you the 5 centimeters of a size difference. And so what you're losing on the swings, you're making up on the roundabout, in that you're working with averages. And now you know that you are catching 5 centimeters to the small and 5 centimeters to the large. And so if they order an in-between size, they should be able to fit in within a 10 centimeter range either side. That makes sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the small, medium, large helps you, excuse me, essentially to manage customer expectation.
Absolutely. And you can give measurements on your website, and I can tell you, I know a tape measure is a very simple thing. You think it's not a hard tool to use. I go as far as buying tape measures with the indications of the millimeters on both sides of the tape, because believe it or not, this is very difficult for a left-handed person to work with, and I'm left-handed. And so right-handed tape measures are difficult for left-handed people. So you can actually buy a left-handed tape measure.
Wow.
And so it seems so ridiculous that people don't know how to work a tape measure, but it's actually very difficult to get accurate body measurements. And so I would recommend that clients are not measuring themselves.
Mm. I also think, I mean, my own body ebbs and flows with the time of the month, the time of the year. So it might be my body measurement today, but it's not necessarily my body measurement tomorrow.
No, and that's why more and more we are working with stretch in wovens and knits. We've got comfortable. We no longer wear corsets, and we're not used to wearing constrictive woven clothing. So the other thing, the last thing, and I will speak to this in later sessions around grading, but knowing that there should be a 5 centimeter difference between each size. There's also a place to know that you can do a 2-size jump in your grading.
Okay.
And so know that you can get so far with the stretch allowance, and then you do not have to do a 5 centimeter grade. You could do a 10 centimeter grade and make up the rest in your stretch.
Okay.
And I do not recommend doing 6 sizes in a cut if you're a small company just starting out. Do four sizes and get clever with the grading, so that what you lose on the swings you will make up on the roundabout, and you will be able to accommodate most sizes within that 4-size jump.
So what kind of size of collection do you recommend for a small designer starting out?
Great question. And you know, back in the day, we used to design stories. And what that means is when you have manufactured your range, I beg my pardon, when you have manufactured the range and it's hanging in a retail environment, or you are displaying it online, or somebody comes into your boutique or your small home showroom, that it looks like a story. And so you can pick up the pants and the top and go, oh, look, that looks together. And if I just added that jacket, I have a complete capsule that I can wear. And so I recommend that as you start out on a collection, the collection is not bigger than 15 units.
Okay.
And remember that as you are funding this process, it is not a cheap endeavor. You will be financially funding this process for at least 6 months. And how I get to that is it will take at least a week to design, a week for the pattern maker to make it, 2 weeks for the CMT to sample it, another week for the pattern maker to do any corrections of it, another week to resample, another week to do any further corrections, and we normally do at least 3 iterations to get a pattern right. It is very, very seldom from an original drawing to a complete pattern that's ready for production not to do 3 samples. You then done the 3 samples, you're now ready to grade that pattern, so that's a further week to grade that pattern. You would then do a sample of the graded range so that you can start selling off that fitting range. If you miss that step, that's also fine, and you go straight into production. Production could then take 6 weeks because you've got to book a space on the line. And then, only then are you starting to sell. In that time, you have paid cash for the pattern, for the fabric, for the trims, for the CMT. It takes a very long time before you see a return on your investment. And so we talk about breaking down your range into capsules, into a story, and that all 15 garments relate to each other. And so somebody who is tall can then layer that outfit. And it would also make sense for somebody who is portly short to layer that garment. It would look fantastic on both a tall person and a short person. And so it's important to design knowing all of the permutations of those 15 garments within a story. Even that, 15 garments is quite a big range. And within each garment, in order to cover your R&D costs and recoup some of your outlay, you have to cut at least 25 garments per style. Okay. And this is what this is talking about. It may be a different size curve where we know that we've got less smalls, more mediums, more larges. But it may look differently and say you have very few smalls, very few mediums, but more larges and extra larges. The average size in South Africa of women is she's 5'3" and she is a size 44. We are the third most obese country in the world. So your size curve you will know from your target market. And so, as I always say, cut in your 4 basic colors that you know. Don't ever be embarrassed about recutting every year. You know what your best sellers are. And in that range of 15, you can have your stalwarts like that elliptic shape hem top and your yoga pants. It really is okay that your clients know and love, and next season will phone you saying, please send me the same thing that she's bought every year for the last 4 years.
Would you recommend that designers actually niche? You know, if they know they've got, for example, very tall girls who like to buy their designs, to then niche around that?
Mel, yes and no. And I'm saying no because the world is in such an uncertain place. And so I think you know what your market is, and I would rather go into a niche where I know I produce a fantastic pair of pants, because I can lengthen those pants and I can shorten those pants. And you're never going to go wrong with a standard black pair of pants. There's not one person that I think is listening to this that doesn't have a pair of black pants that they love.
Yes.
And so you can niche yourself by, say, having a very standard work pair of pants without a hem. And so the short girls can hem the pants themselves, and the longer girls can let down the hem cuff and just. I am not recommending cutting individual pants.
Okay.
You will never, ever recoup your time on the cutting table. We know that the active machines is where you make your money back.
Okay.
So this is an easy way to get to your units. Just cut over 5 colorways, your standard colors, and then you can do your fashion color for that season that will never repeat. And that's why I chose a green. Green is very difficult to sell in certain areas in the country. Okay. And that's where you will safely get to your minimum order of 25 units. We do know, though, in order to break even, you should be cutting at least 100 units.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, and that's the end of my story.
That is really useful information. Thank you so much, Colleen. I appreciate it so much.
Perfect.
Well, I thought perhaps I'd add just a little anecdote about when I made clothing in the 1990s. I knew nothing about any of the stuff you're talking about. And I used to just, I realize now that I was really in the Wild West. You know, I would just take fabric to the CMT company and hope they knew what to do with it. If I'd been armed with this information back then, I would possibly have been much more cautious. And I would have saved myself a whole lot of money. I lost a lot of money. I didn't, things that I was unrealistic about was how long things would take. Yes. I would kind of in October go out and buy rolls of fabric for dresses that I wanted to have in my flea market stand in December.
Yeah.
And I think there also I was very unrealistic. I didn't realize how much CMT companies would back up during that period. You know, if something
Oh,
went wrong with something they were making for me, it would very often then carry over to January, February, March again of the following year. And then that stock that I was hoping to have in my stand in December, I would only see in March, April, when I would then be needing to work on winter already. You know,
yeah.
so those timelines and those costs and that planning were not in place, and I paid the financial price for that back then.
So thank you for reminding me. You can get your from origination to production down to like a 6-week cycle. And so, you know, if you are working on ranges, you can get production every 6 weeks. But as a start, you are looking at a 6-month process.
Okay.
And so when you go to a pattern maker, you are not looking at this season, you are looking at the following season.
Okay.
The other thing is, along with a cutting order and a delivery note, I would always supply a cutting sample, and I will go through that on how to get to a cutting sample in our next interview. And that cutting sample is also a sewing sample. And so the machinist can then look at your sample and follow that sewing procedure. And why I do that is because a lot of machinists have their own techniques and habits. And so they might do an edge stitch on the cuff when I actually want a foot stitch. And that becomes my telltale that you pick up my shirt, you look at the cuff and go, oh, I know who that is. I know who that designer is. And it also becomes very important to have a stitching sample if you are splitting your CMT across 3 or 4 different factories. And so say you've got a massive production run, congratulations, the business is doing well. But in order to manage it, some CMTs are not set up for 1,000 units. And so I would divide up my 5 colorways across 5 different CMTs. And so they can each do a small run. I would then provide 5 samples to each separate CMT so that I know what sample A it looks like and sample B looks like is the same as the production that comes out of factory A and factory B.
Okay, that's very useful information.
Now, up colorways. And one thing you learn with black is do not split black rolls of fabric because you will get shading.
Yes. 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 I think the other piece of information that you shared earlier that is really worth maybe repeating here is that when you deliver your order to the factory, you must get somebody who's in a position of authority to sign off, and not just whoever is at the door available. Yeah, I think that's very important information as well. That could have saved me a whole lot of heartache in the 90s as well, because I used to, you know, whoever was at the door would just sign off for me.
Yes, yes, and you don't want to be a trouble, and you don't want to worry people, and you're trying to be polite. It doesn't work. Really doesn't work.
Yeah.
Mel, do we have enough time that I can just talk a little bit more about cabbage?
Okay.
Cabbage. And so cabbage is a slang term that we use in factories, where cabbage is the extra that happens and is sold out the back door. And so if you don't get your rating accurate, the cutting room, if they are not honest, and not all cutting rooms are dishonest, most cutting rooms have got the most incredibly ethical people. But if it is not an honest cutting room, they will lay up on their improved rating. And let's say I've improved it 10 centimeters and my complete rating is only 100 centimeters. Over enough lays, I will get 1 free every time. And so it gets bundled, but when it comes to the delivery, I just section off everything that we've agreed to as a team to collude together, that these extras go out the back door. And that's what cabbage is called. We had a situation with one of the most famous designers where the piece of butcher paper that's laid at the bottom and the marker that's laid on the top, as we bundled the garments, the top layer of paper and the bottom layer became a pattern. Okay. Those were sent out into Soweto, and they were then created a little factory environment with a fantastic jacket that we knew would sell in every season. And so that corrupt cutter was using those markers to produce his own fabulous jacket in the most horrific fabric and the cheapest fabric imaginable. And we found out about it. Somebody was honest in the factory and let us know that that had been happening. And we were driven into the Soweto with a police escort to go and seize those garments out of their back production house. But you can imagine what it potentially could have done to the brand, because that jacket was so well known. And so, yes, cabbage can happen, and there are ways to encourage people to be honest by creating incredible working environments that are fair and equitable, that they don't feel that they need to make extra income because they're not earning enough.
Yes, yes. Thank you. That's awesome information. Once again, you've shared really awesome information that I'm sure is going to be very helpful to all the designers out there who are watching. Thank you, Colleen.
Perfect. Thanks, Mel. And thank you for allowing me to just be part of this wonderful process. Thank you.
Pleasure.